recording. So I will start again. Welcome everyone. My name is Michael Taylor Judd. I am chair of the West Seattle Transportation Coalition, and we're happy you could be with us for our July virtual membership meeting. Tonight's agenda is very full. We will do some quick welcome and introductions and then quickly move. We've got a bunch of previous meeting minutes to move. We do have a YouTube channel. It has a really ugly address at the moment. We're hoping more people will go and subscribe to that so that we can get a much nicer, shorter, prettier URL, but that is what we currently have. We will get underway pretty quickly with a conversation with Sound Transit and some of the Sound Transit board members. We've got a number of folks with us tonight. We'll be talking about impacts from coronavirus and the West Seattle Bridge closure on their budgets and how they're looking at delivery of Sound Transit 3 projects, which of course includes the West Seattle and Ballard Link extensions. By 7:45, we'll have a very quick conversation with the Seattle Department of Transportation about our ongoing conversations with mitigation during the closure. We have Heather Marks with us, who everybody should be familiar with. We also currently have Director Sam Zimbabwe on the call. I don't know if he will be chatting with us or not, but he is on the call. Thank you for being here. Around 8:05, we do need to re-elect a number of us who are on the board, if we're to stay on the board, as well as if there are other folks looking to nominate into some of our vacant positions. And then we'll quickly move through some old and new business before we adjourn at around 8:30. Very quickly, if you're joining us for the first time, this is the purpose of the West Seattle Transportation Coalition. We are a peninsula-wide organization working to address transportation and commuting challenges for the nearly 100,000 people living and working on the West Seattle Peninsula. And we accomplish this through things that should seem obvious. We work to get the support of residents on the peninsula. We engage elected officials at all levels, as you'll see tonight. We partner with government agencies to encourage people to take surveys, keep informed, get involved, etc. And we do our best to engage with businesses, other community groups, special interest groups, and individuals to help us all work toward what's best for our community. We have 6 legislative priorities that have been, most of which have been around for a year or two at least here. West Seattle Bridge Transportation Corridor has always been our major issue. As you imagine, that's pretty key right now, and we've added detour routes to that since we're looking at a much sort of wider corridor as to how we get from the peninsula towards downtown Seattle and other areas. Sound Transit 3 plans for light rail to West Seattle. The Fauntleroy Way Boulevard project, which is currently on hold. The Del Ridge Way multimodal projects and Rapid Ride H, which are currently under construction. Highland Parkway traffic control, which SDOT is doing a lot of work on right now in response to the bridge. And finally, just the general idea that we need to improve transportation infrastructure to match Seattle's growth, which seems obvious, but as we've worked to point out, we've been a little lacking at times with matching infrastructure to growth, and we're seeing some of the constraints of that. Very quickly, everybody's getting used to virtual meetings right now, but most of our speakers, we do ask, if you can if you're comfortable turning your cameras on to speak, it makes, things seem friendlier and more intimate. If you're not speaking, please mute yourself unless you've been called on to speak. Be present. In this, most people will be confined to Q&A. When we get to that, take advantage of the opportunities to virtually raise your hand or to use the chat to ask questions. And above all, have a good time and engage with others. And feel free, if you're comfortable, to use the chat to share thoughts with people about what you're hearing and how you feel. Again, I'll remind you that if you send it publicly, everyone sees it and it may be recorded. I'm going to briefly pause and hand over to Kate Wells, who's my co-host this evening, to quickly chat. For folks who are not used to Zoom, what are some of the key things people need to know about finding the chat and the Q&A? Kate?
Well, of course, I don't know all of the different platforms you might be using, but the main ones that I would look for are the participants list is a good way to see who's here and to select somebody to chat with. But also in the chat window, you can see a drop-down menu or a drop-down bar to select somebody to message if you wish to do that. When we get to Q&A, I will be moderating that, and I'll be looking through the chat to read people's questions if they don't want to actually read those themselves. Excuse me. And otherwise, you can raise your hand in the participants box and ask the question yourself. I encourage you to do that. It's a little easier for you to follow up with the answer if you ask the question yourself and maybe get some nuance that I might miss while reading from the chat window. But yes, either way, we will try to get to all of your questions as best we can.
All right, thank you, Kate. We are obviously not going to ask, we're up over 40 people at the moment. We're obviously not going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. But what we do ask is, again, take advantage of that chat if you're comfortable. Share your name, share your pronouns or access needs. If you're someone who can't see the video or you're listening on the phone, well, I guess you can't type if you're listening on the phone, but maybe you're having audio issues or different things like that. Let us know the neighborhood that you're from. And then the fun question, if you're willing to share, how have you been using transportation this summer? And then additionally, if you're new to us and you need to be added to the WSTC email list, you can send a private chat message to our board member, John Wright, who's on the call, and just share your email with him. Again, that's using a private chat message so everyone doesn't see your email, and he can get you added to our list right away. If you're not comfortable with doing that, you can also send an email to info@westseattletc.org. And then again, very quickly, so there's a nice screen capture of our YouTube channel at the moment. But for board members, we have previous meeting minutes for April, May, and June. So I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes as distributed for April, May, and June 2020.
I second.
Thank you. Does anyone have any key changes that need to be made other than grammar or other improvements that you haven't already sent to Kate? All right. Then all those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? All right. Without further ado then, we will get into our conversation with Sound Transit and Sound Transit board members. And so I would like to welcome King County Executive, as well as Sound Transit Board Vice Chair Dow Constantine. We're going to let him chat pretty quickly. We'll see if there's time for question and answer, but I'll let him manage that. He needs to be gone around 7 p.m. So Dow, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight and for inviting us to present. I'm going to try to talk quickly through this, but it will touch on Metro and probably water taxis as well as Sound Transit. You know, I've always been very focused on land use, transportation, and the connection between the two. And one of the things that's become more evident more recently is the way in which like education and like health, mobility is essential to expanding opportunity, to ensuring that people have access to prosperity and the opportunity to thrive. We, prior to COVID, had some 500,000 riders a day, and for them, reliable and fast transit was, and I believe will again be, essential to their quality of life. And that's on Metro Transit, but I'm also including Sound Transit in that as we work toward a, from the customer perspective, seamless system. So, you know, during this crisis, Sound Transit is going to see its revenues take a substantial hit, primarily because of the reliance on the sales tax. About $900 million for this year and next year. The board is set about to try to come up with a balanced budget by anticipating potential cuts or delays in the program that was approved by the voters in 2016, as well as other projects that are remaining uncompleted. But I've been continuing to advocate for us, obviously doing our due diligence on that, but also focusing on the real issue, which is the lousy revenue system that we have that collapses every time the economy goes sideways and doesn't really ask enough of the federal government in terms of match, nor the state government in terms of reforming our god-awful tax system. I think that we should be saying what it is we need to do to deliver exactly what the voters approved and on the timeline the voters were presented, or to do it better and sooner. This economy over time has plenty of capacity to support the capital work, the operations in transportation, and in fact, the work that we need to do across every other area of public responsibility to make sure people have the opportunity to succeed. Metro Transit is also facing, because of the reliance on the sales tax, substantial shortfalls. And as I mentioned, those 500,000 riders a day are going to need a robust and seamless transit system. We are working to build back service that was cut during the COVID crisis, even as that crisis persists. And Metro is forging ahead on all fronts, both capital and operating. This spring, last month, we restored service on the number 125, on the 21X, and in September, we'll be restoring service on the 55, 56, 57 lines in my neighborhood. And we are adding service on the C line as crowding demands that we add service. Now, we recognize the capacity is less because we're not able to have as many people in each vehicle for social distancing reasons. But we are intent on providing the transportation that people need, and especially here on the Duwamish Peninsula and between here and downtown with the crisis around the West Seattle Bridge. And along those lines, we have returned the water taxi from the sort of minimal schedule of 2 runs in the morning and 2 in the afternoon to our regular winter schedule of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. trips. And we will continue to increase that service as capacity allows when demand grows and the public health crisis permits us to have more people on the vessels. I think we can have about 86 on a vessel now, 85. One of the key issues I need to really urge on people is, and I don't think there's anyone on this call who's probably irresponsible enough to not have heeded this, but please wear your damn mask. Our operators need to know that all of our customers are wearing their masks. We all need each other to be able to be careful and to avoid any unnecessary infection, which is going to slow down the recovery, slow down our ability to restore our transit service. I want to speak briefly. I know this is primarily about Sound Transit, so from my perspective as a Sound Transit board member, I mentioned my advocacy for us really thinking about how we can fix the revenue problem that we had long before we went to the ballot with Sound Transit 3, the sort of rickety set of tools we were handed to try to put together a regional high-capacity transit system. And we're going to need the legislature's help to do that. I think we need to do that. I think we need to go to the United States government under President Biden and a Democratic Senate and say, this is a project that does every single thing we're prioritizing. It moves people and builds the economy, puts people to work right now. It transforms our transportation system into one that is much, much more efficient and much less reliant on fossil fuels. It creates a much better and more sustainable land use pattern across this entire region. It is, in sum, the Green New Deal distilled down to a single, very concrete and very much shovel-ready or underway project. And we have to push this as a model for the rest of the country. Thousands of people are working on Sound Transit projects. Thousands of people will be able to weather this recession, this depression, because of that. and thousands more rely on us getting these lines open, including to West Seattle. And I am someone who's been working on that since I was old enough to be working on anything, and pushed very hard to make sure that West Seattle, along with other locations, were included in the Sound Transit 3 program. And I'm going to be pushing very hard to make sure that we are not simply accepting whatever the economy and this lousy tax system and are being sold short by the federal government hands us, that we are going out and aggressively seeking, demanding the resources we need to deliver what the people have voted for. But there is, obviously a lot of hand-wringing by people in various parts of the region over whether there will be any money left to build their projects. Let me remind you that we do and we will have enough revenues to build everything that's been approved. The issue is really not whether, it's when. And we need to make sure that we are pushing to deliver those projects on time or sooner than was proposed. And that is going to require us to do a lot of hard work with our legislators, with Congress, and with the administration. I believe that this is a moment when our national government is going to, that is to say after November, seriously consider investments of the kind we have not seen since the New Deal, in major capital investments designed to accelerate this country forward and to put people to work, to make lives better, to ensure economic security. And this is a place where we need to be at the head of the line. I know that our senators, that our US representatives are really well aware of this and focused on it. The same could be said for the West Seattle Bridge project. The same could be said for the work that we're doing outside of transportation on removing culverts and restoring our rivers and streams and salmon runs. These are major capital investments that we already have teed up that we need to move forward on, and we need the help of our national government, one that has sort of abdicated its responsibility over the course of the last several decades. Need that government to get re-engaged in helping us move our economy forward. I'm looking forward to your questions. It looks like we have a few minutes for those, and I just appreciate everything that everyone here is doing to help make the Duwamish Peninsula more mobile. God knows I live it every day.
Thanks, Dow. We like electeds who are succinct. I will toss over to Kate to monitor some of the chat questions.
Well, there's nothing at the moment, so
All right.
Shall I start calling on
a minute?
Are there folks? Are there folks who are ready to ask some questions? Again, if you're in the participants list, there should be an opportunity for you to raise your hand. We can unmute you.
And I will say a familiar face at this group, Chris Arkills, is on the meeting and is available to help me with technical questions. And Joe McDermott's here to help with policy questions. And I have because I'm so busy with the multiple crises presented, I have a very broad definition of technical questions these days. So everybody go ahead.
All right.
Hey, Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing? And I'm sorry to take it away from Sound Transit, but the work that we're doing at Metro to try to rebuild the service on the Duwamish Peninsula and get ready for when commutes restart across the river?
Yeah, well, as Heather will probably tell you a little bit more in detail, and you've heard in previous meetings, the day the bridge was closed, we started working very closely with both an internal team at Metro, half of which lives in West Seattle, so certainly understands the mobility challenges, and with SDOT and other agencies to try and develop a good mobility plan. Obviously, losing the capacity of the bridge can't be easily replaced. So I think we have a very good plan to work on this. We are, if there is a temporary closure of the low bridge or anything like that, we are ready to reroute instantly and have done so. So I won't go on in detail so that people can answer questions, but happy any time to talk to anybody about Metro's efforts on the bridge.
Thanks.
Well, since you tossed to Chris and opened the Pandora's box of Metro for the moment, I will ask, we get a whole lot of inquiries. Many people are quite happy with what we've been hearing from Metro in the last week or two about restoring some additional service into Admiral, as well as adding additional buses to the Rapid Ride C. But a long-standing problem has been the the south end of the peninsula. Folks in the Arbor Heights neighborhood have really been kind of left high and dry with everything being cut with the Route 22. And that's something that really stretches all the way back to the last recession. And is there anything we can be doing to look at ways to increase service there? There are a lot of folks who tell us they just simply can't plan appointments. They can't do anything because the sort of frequency of service that's available up there doesn't allow them to use transit. And I've had several people reach out to us and say actually that they're calling access transit in order to get around, which seems to me not the most financially sound way for us to be moving people around at this
very
time.
Expensive. You know, I can't say anything definitive about that. You know what the challenge is, which is resources. We are working to restore, and of course, you know, I'm here kind of halfway between Alki and Admiral. We continually lose service and then kind of claw our way back, whether it's the 55, 6, 7, or whether it's the 37. Things keep disappearing. So I'm familiar with the challenge. Is there a current conversation, Chris, about how we can reach more people in Arbor Heights? And I did want to mention, if I forget before this, that before the end of this, that we're also working on building out the 120 route to become the Rapid Ride Line H, which should carry about 13,000 people a day between Burien, White Center, and West Seattle. So go ahead, Chris.
We are bringing back the 21X to the 21 Express in September to serve Arbor Heights. I honestly, it's been a long day. I can't remember whether we're bringing back the 22. Maybe Joe McDermott's excellent policy staff member, Melissa Bailey, remembers. But
I do not, Chris. I always defer to you.
But
I was afraid he was yielding to me.
But we are bringing back service as rapidly as we can. We're following the direction of public health in what service we bring back. We need to maintain the health of our workforce too. It's challenging times for all of us, and but we are aware that Arbor Heights and some other neighborhoods haven't received the service that they deserve.
Kate, how's the chat looking?
Yes. I've got a couple questions. First question is about combining the West Seattle Bridge and ST3 and how that could work.
That was something that immediately, like the day that the bridge announcement was made, came to mind. And I think it continues to be intriguing. You know, Sound Transit has raised some cautions about how viable that really is for various technical reasons. And I take those seriously, but I also think that we need to really insist on people being fully open to conversations about whether there could be some benefit in either combining or coordinating those projects. As we were looking at just getting light rail across the Duwamish, there's enormous challenges trying to thread the track through this area by the insistence of the port not having anything even cast a shadow north of the West Seattle Bridge, trying to find a way to bring the thing in and land it where it has some utility for folks. I do think there just has to be an opportunity, if there's going to be a lot of heavy capital work being done, or even if the bridge is going to be replaced, to get some combined benefit, some economies of scale out of that. And obviously that could run the gamut from simply coordinating construction schedules to having a single structure and really realigning the West Seattle Light Rail route to match that. I guess this takes me back to how do we provide more metro transit service? How do we deliver more sound transit? I have been really working to impress upon my hardworking leadership and cabinet over the course of the last several months that this is a moment of crisis, but it's also a moment of opportunity, and we need to take this shakeup, this upending of a lot of the status quo to be much more innovative than our institutions and systems would previously have allowed, to think boldly, to push on solutions that were considered to be unorthodox or unthinkable before. And I think that applies in this situation too. There are hardworking staffs who are got their heads down, they're trying to get their work done in this silo or that silo or that silo, and it's up to us as elected officials and all community members to make sure that we expect the outcome to be one that is irrespective of these arbitrary lines between agencies or between jurisdictions, one that actually serves people who don't care about those distinctions. Did I miss anything on that? No. Okay.
That's good. Got one more question if you've got a minute.
Yes, we can do that.
Water taxi, what kind of third-party funding does King County need to expand service? Metro presented to the Transportation Coalition and Bridge Task Force and said that third-party funding is necessary, but didn't specify that.
I mean, that just means that they don't have enough money to do more than what they're trying to do, and they need to get some from somewhere else, which, again, federal funding would be tremendously helpful in that regard. Chris, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say we have the boats and the capital to run a more schedule. The capacity at Seacrest is 3 boats an hour. You can run about a boat and load it and unload it every 20 minutes. We have boats and the crew on hold that where there are the funding to go to a full all-day schedule. We could run 3 boats an hour all the time, but right now we do not have the funding, so we'll be working to see what creative ways we can expand that service as demand comes back.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael, for having me on. I look forward to, since you're recording this, being able to watch the rest of the meeting without the jeopardy of having to be asked a question about anything difficult. But I really appreciate everyone's advocacy for our neighborhood. And I am here, and Chris will, of course, share with me what goes on the rest of the meeting. I am here to be your advocate as well.
All right, but before you slip away right there, are you wearing a Kraken thing already?
I'm always right on the bleeding edge, so yes.
Apparently, that's you got to be an elected official. Okay.
In minutes of the announcement, there was a little man standing there with a box, and it had a sticker and a hat in it. So they are on top of things.
Very nice. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.
We will take a moment, everyone. We have staff on the call tonight, Dawn Billen, as well as Leda. I can never properly pronounce your last name. I apologize. She's got it loaded already, and so we will hand over to you guys.
Michael? Quickly before, Pete Spalding had his hand raised, and maybe he could still ask his question of who's left in the meeting? Or
well, we'll have more question and
after
answer.
this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, take it away, Leda and Dawn.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us. I will go ahead and hand it off to Dawn Billen, who is our Executive Director of Planning, Environment, and Project Development. And it's great for me to get to see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. With that, though, I will hand it off to Dawn.
All right, well, thank you, Leda and Michael, and good evening, everyone. I know Leda's been a semi-regular here, and other members of the West Seattle and Ballard project team have been here. I've not had the opportunity to meet with you before, so thanks for the invitation. And we'll move right into the presentation. Next slide. So I'm going to touch tonight on our construction activity, our service, and then the capital program realignment, which the executive overviewed at a high level as well. Next slide. So our response in all of these areas is guided by our values of collaboration, customer focus, inclusion and respect, safety, integrity, and quality, as well as our strategic priorities, which began with a commitment to equity and fairness, environmental stewardship, partnership, and the communities that we serve. Next slide. Next slide. So as the stay-at-home orders went into place with the pandemic developing, we did go through a period of suspending most of our construction in early April. And if you're not familiar with the portion of our expansion program that's currently under construction, that includes light rail to Northgate and on to Linwood, light rail to Bellevue and Redmond, south to Federal Way, and additionally the expansion of our Tacoma Link service to the Hilltop neighborhood in the city of Tacoma. By May, we were able to resume most construction under strict safety protocols, which remain in place today. Next slide. Additionally, our CEO, Peter Rogoff, in recognition that a recession was very quickly developing, put in place a number of near-term priorities to guide our response. So those included keeping construction going safely, and I touched on those projects briefly. We also have a light rail operations and maintenance facility under construction in the city of Bellevue. The good news on these projects is that even with the temporary slowdown, they remain on pace for their scheduled revenue service dates between 2021 and 2024. Next slide. Yeah. So again, all 28 stations will be done by 2024. We're really happy to be able to provide thousands of direct and indirect jobs through this construction. During the last recession, we were a part of the economic recovery, and we want to play that role again for the region. Next slide. On the service side, we've had, similar to Metro, a very dramatic decrease in ridership over the last few months. We were down from 160,000 daily boardings to as low as 20,000 boardings. Ridership has very slowly started to return. We're up around 30,000 daily boardings today. Next slide. Part of our operational response was that initially we suspended fares, and that was done in large part to protect our operators, particularly the bus operators. However, we have been gradually resuming fares. Fares resumed on Lincoln Sounder June 1st, earlier this month on the ST Express system. And service is gradually ramping up around the region. Next slide. So this just gives you a snapshot of our current service levels. We're operating the light rail system on 10 to 20 minute headways during the peak period. That compares to a 6-minute headway prior to COVID. This September, we're anticipating being back to around an 8-minute peak headway. Sounder service from the south and the north has had reduced trips. Again, we'll add some more this November. ST Express is already back to around 78% of normal, with more trips coming in November. Next slide. So probably of greatest interest to you is our capital program realignment. First, just to give you a snapshot of how the recession is impacting our program. As Dow spoke to, a significant portion of our revenue comes from sales tax, which is very volatile. and down during the recession, but so are fares as a result of reduced ridership. And so is our motor vehicle excise tax. So all of these sources have been impacted to some degree by the recession, which means that we have to rely more on debt over time. However, there are limits on how much debt we can issue. Go to the next slide. So that orangish bar is our debt capacity. And our debt capacity under state law is a function of the assessed value in our taxing district. So our taxing district includes the urban areas of Snohomish, King, and Pierce County. The agency can issue debt equal up to 1.5% of the assessed value in the district. In green is what our finance plan looked like prior to the recession. In the early 2030s, we would have been nearing our debt capacity, but still underneath it. However, in a severe recession scenario with revenues down, you need to issue more debt if you continue to expand service and capital on the same trajectory. And that causes us to eventually exceed our debt capacity, which means that the program is unaffordable. And we have to take steps early to address that so that we aren't ever in a situation of actually exceeding that capacity. So that's why the board is undertaking a realignment conversation now. Next slide. So just to put some numbers to this, Dow mentioned the loss of about $900 million this year and projected similar loss next year. This is under a moderate recession scenario. And that over the life of the program, that could translate into a $12 billion loss. Because as the overall tax base shrinks, while it will recover, it won't grow as fast as previously assumed. And so we do have this cumulative impact as well as the near-term impact. Next slide. So near-term priorities, beyond the construction issue that I spoke to earlier, we have projects that are in various phases of planning and design. And we've continued with the current phases of project work on all of those projects, and that includes the West Seattle and Ballard project. So the project team is continuing to work on the draft EIS, planning to publish that document in the first half of next year. But for some of our projects, there will be a more incremental approach that is needed over time. We also put a hold on advancing any projects from planning into final design or from final design into construction. That does not impact the West Seattle project, but there are other projects in our district that have been impacted by that pause. Next slide. So the good news is that the board does have a number of tools to manage program affordability. They can delay project completion. That can be a little counterintuitive for folks because, of course, when you delay projects, they do incur more inflation cost. But because of the debt capacity issue that I spoke to earlier, by spreading our projects out over a longer period of time, our debt capacity increases and we don't use it as fast. And ultimately, we're able to afford every project in the program just on a different schedule. Another option to try and minimize delay impacts would be to modify the project scope. So to seek ways to reduce the cost of the project in order to be able to deliver projects sooner. As Dow spoke to, we can also seek new funding opportunities, either through grants or through funding partners. And the board could also choose to go to the state legislature and request the authority to go to the ballot for a tax increase. Slide 18. But there's a lot of uncertainty with all of those approaches. We don't know what will develop on the federal front. We don't know whether there will be another stimulus package like there was during the Great Recession under the Obama administration. We know that the state has its own revenue challenges, and that seeking approval for new local taxes is always a challenging endeavor as well. Slide 19. So a very blunt approach to the recession would be for the board to simply delay all projects by 5 years. I've not heard anyone on the board or anywhere else, frankly, say that they think that this would be a smart approach, but it does illustrate kind of the magnitude of the challenge. In the absence of new funding sources, we are going to have to make some difficult decisions about how to phase the program over time. Next slide. So as the board undertook this conversation over the last few months, they settled in June on a year-long path forward. At the June meeting, they adopted some criteria to provide a framework for this decision-making, and I'll speak to that in a moment. They also agreed that through the remainder of the year, they would look at any projects that have been paused due to that hold that I spoke to of moving from between planning and design or design and construction, and allow for some incremental steps. And then that by next July, they would aim to adopt a comprehensive program realignment to rebalance our expansion plans within available revenues. And of course, by that time, we may know more about any changes on the federal funding scene as well. Next slide. So in the first half of next year, as the board moves from sort of incremental near-term decision-making to looking more comprehensively at our program, this is a simple flow chart illustrating the process that they'll go through. They'll use criteria to inform the development of different scenarios. And by scenarios, I mean different ways to reprogram our expansion plans. Could be delaying projects. It could also be phasing projects. Those of you that have been in the region for a while may remember that originally light rail between the University District and airport was going to open as a single project. In fact, it opened in phases over time. And we could take that approach with current extensions. Some of our programs, you can also incrementally introduce service. So when the Sounder commuter rail service between Tacoma and Seattle started, as an example, not all of the stations and access facilities were complete, but the service started, and then those stations and access facilities were completed over time, and there's ongoing expansion on that program. The other thing that we'll consider in scenarios is the revenue options that Dow spoke to. So he's been very clear that he wants to understand what type of new revenue would be needed to keep us on, or as close to as possible, the original schedule for the ST3 program. So we'll develop these different scenarios, we'll review them with the public, we'll review them with the board, and we'll iterate until we land on a balanced plan that best meets the intent of the voter approved plans within available revenue. Next slide. So here's the criteria that I referenced a couple different times. Most of these criteria were used in the development of the ST3 plan itself, and then a few sort of speak to current status a little more directly. So ridership potential, of course, is always near the top of the list. How many riders is a project going to serve? Equity, How well does the project expand mobility for transit-dependent, low-income, and other diverse populations? Connecting centers. Our region has a regional land use plan that calls for high-capacity transit to connect designated regional transit centers, and that's always been an important part of the Sound Transit plans. Tenure speaks to when was a project approved by the voters. So there are some projects from the ST2 ballot measure in 2008 that are not yet complete. And of course, many projects from the ST3 ballot measure that are not complete. Outside funding, sometimes a project, we may be partnering with another agency and our need to go forward can sometimes leverage funding for them as well. Completing the spine, the Sound Transit Long Range Plan identifies light rail between Tacoma, Seattle, Everett, and Redmond as the HCT spine, high capacity transit spine. That's always been a priority for the board. But we also want to advance logically beyond that spine. And then phasing compatibility speaks to, you know, some of the options that I referenced earlier of can a project be opened in segments or phased over time? Next slide. So that's my presentation material, and Leda and I would be happy to take questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Don. I know we've got a number of questions queuing, but before we move into the Q&A, I want to switch us back over here. We also have on the call this evening, whoops, that's not what we wanted. We also have on the call this evening King County Council Vice Chair and a Sound Transit Board Member, Joe McDermott. And then we have with us City of Seattle Deputy Mayor, who's here on behalf of Mayor Jenny Durkan, Shefali Ranganathan. Folks may also recall Shefali. A number of us have known her since back when she was Executive Director at Transportation Choices Coalition. So she's got a pretty deep knowledge of transportation issues here in our region and in the state. So I want to quickly give Joe and then Shefali an opportunity if there's something you need to say before we move into a conversation and we can start responding to questions.
Thank you, Michael. I picked up on your hint earlier this evening about appreciating elected officials who can be brief. So I won't start with the invention of the wheel, but I do want to give a little bit of context about where we are now as we talk about Sound Transit and West Seattle to Ballard Link Light Rail Extension. We spent over a year working with community groups and formal community group that several of you served on, and I co-chaired the elected leaders group that we had that was for all of West Seattle to Ballard extension, that we had rich West Seattle representation on, including myself and Dow, Lisa Herbold, Teresa Mosqueda, and Lorena Gonzalez. So we were very well represented. We advanced a number of alternatives into the draft environmental impact study, the DEIS process. Those are specific alignments that we are studying, learning more about, both engineering and cost, and we'll receive that back in early 2021. And then we'll go into final EIS. And it's, as we do that we'll need some more work done on identifying third-party funding if we're choosing options that are more expensive than the base model, if you will. And also that whole context and conversation is certainly affected by the COVID recession and the regressive tax system that drives the effects even deeper. A couple people have already spoken about the 26% drop in revenue for Sound Transit in the next year or so, And between now and 2041, the expected 18% drop in anticipated revenue and a moderate recession forecast. We've talked about the numbers. Ridership is down as well, as about 75% system-wide in Sound Transit, similar for Metro as well. And then living here on the peninsula, none of us will forget March 23rd, when Shefali gave me a call, and I paced around my living room having a conversation with her shortly after noon, learning what was going to be announced that afternoon and the closure of the bridge that evening. Makes us all that much more aware of how dependent we are on transit, on connectivity, and really drove questions about, could these two projects happen at the same time? Is there a ability to link them together? And as Heather Marks has talked, I think, at a previous meeting, I actually believe the Transportation Coalition was the first community-based organization who I joined for an all Zoom, all virtual presentation meeting some months ago now, that unless, given everything we know now, it seems impractical to think that we're going to be able to build one bridge over the Duwamish that would replace the West Seattle Bridge and carry light rail. That doesn't seem plausible given the limited amount of the bridge that would need to be replaced in a full replacement alternative. But it does mean that two projects are being planned and implemented for the broader planning purposes, essentially some of the same time. So we need to make sure that we're communicating and that plans can integrate and work together and be executed at the same time. That one doesn't preclude action by the other. I'm going to leave it there now. Let Shefali take the reins for a minute, and then look forward to delving into some of the questions about delayed station in particular. Delayed station, the related question that came up in chat about how quickly we might want to offer up such alternatives. So let me turn it over to Shefali to continue the conversation and then really engage in a conversation with everyone.
Thank you, Councilmember McDermott, and thank you all for having me here. I will follow the Councilmember's example and try to keep it brief and to the point. Mayor Durkan sends her regrets. She did have a town hall here in West Seattle earlier this evening, but it was unfortunate that she had a conflict and couldn't make it. Lots of what has already been covered about Metro and Sound Transit, I don't want to repeat, but just sort of reiterate her really strong support around transit as being critical, not just in terms of a response during COVID. And we have been working really closely with both Sound Transit and Metro to make sure that essential workers can get where they need to go in these challenging times, but also as a tool for recovery. And we recognize that that we want to be ready as a city and as a region to that when we are ready for recovery, that we have a transit system in place that can get people where they need to go. So we've been working with the county around a West Seattle plan. Later on this fall in November, we will be asking voters to renew the Seattle Transportation Benefit District. That package includes some specific investments in West Seattle to recognizes that we're going to have significant mobility challenges moving forward, and how do we make sure people have options to get across. What that package includes is, I know there was a question about funding for a water taxi, is some flexibility in the ability for the city of Seattle to partner with King County Metro to potentially purchase additional water taxi hours once ridership returns. As it relates to Sound Transit, really the mayor has been laser focused, like her fellow board members, on two things. How do we make sure that we build out what we committed to voters? Sound Transit 3 was an incredibly ambitious plan, and rightfully so. This region has been starved of high quality, high capacity transit for a really long time, and we're playing catch up. In my former role at Transportation Choices, I helped work on that campaign. And, you know, we should not miss this opportunity in this crisis to lose sight of sort of the bigger picture around what building out that high capacity transit network looks like, especially light rail to West Seattle and Ballard in the city of Seattle. We will be working with the rest of the board. Mayor Durkan is committed to be creative about additional resources from the federal and state government. Our upside down tax system has been covered many times here. How do we make sure we have progressive and sustainable ways to fund transit, and really think about kind of how transit continues to be a pathway to economic opportunity for this region. And as we think about sort of shaping the Sound Transit 3 plan, Mayor Durkan had advocated for, and she's glad that, you know, fellow board members, including Joe McDermott and Dow Constantine, agreed that we need to work through a plan that makes sure that we are balancing the very real constraints, financial constraints that Don Billen outlined as it relates to the capital program, with what we know voters want and voted for, and how do we make sure to try to be creative around funding, and also how do we engage the public in what are going to be very complicated but very necessary conversations around alignments and those decisions. I know there's lots of views and opinions in West Seattle about what should be the alignment for light rail. And in the midst of COVID, it's really hard to have those conversations in a meaningful way. So Mayor Durkan's priority is to work with the rest of the board and the Sound Transit staff to make sure that we can have inclusive community engagement to result in decision making that is both you know, durable, but is also informed by kind of the reality on the ground. And that includes, you know, I think that like, I know Sam and Heather on the call from SDOT to talk about the West Seattle Bridge. We are intrigued about the opportunities to take the crisis and the challenge of the West Seattle Bridge, but also be thinking about planning for the future. And are there some opportunities to think about the light rail project, maybe in conjunction with that, you know, recognizing that, you know, there are some challenges, and I wouldn't want to present that as a silver bullet, but I think there are some unique opportunities to be thinking creatively about that. And then finally, I just want to reiterate what Mayor Durkan said earlier in the town hall. She is fully committed to a transparent and inclusive process around making sure that we work to repair the bridge in the short term and to eventually work together on its replacement. We have a stakeholder advisory committee that many folks sit on from the neighborhood and from the businesses that are in West Seattle, as well as elected officials who are helping guide that decision making. And we want to make sure that the city is responsive to the mobility needs, both in the short term, but also in the long term. As we know, I was in West Seattle last evening. I mean, both Sam and Heather live in West Seattle, so they experienced that challenge, the mobility challenge from the loss of the high bridge and what that has created for the West Seattle community. So very committed to making sure that folks have information, there are opportunities to have a dialogue about this, and ultimately move with a sense of urgency to replace the bridge, to repair and replace the bridge. Mayor Durkan has already been in conversations with our federal delegation about resources from the feds. She's declared an emergency to allow us to be able to tap additional financial resources. And again, the priority is how do we make sure people have options in the near term as we we work to both repair and then eventually replace a bridge. So I'll stop there. Happy to have a discussion with the rest of you.
All right, thank you very much. So I will move us in. We've got 10 minutes or so. I'll move us into the chat and Q&A portion. I know we've got Pete Spalding in the queue, and Kate can start looking over questions we've got in the chat. Again, so we have Joe McDermott, who's a Sound Transit board member. Our deputy mayor is standing in for Mayor Jenny Durkan, who is a Sound Transit board member. We have the staff who spoke earlier. We also, as was referenced, we have our SDOT director, Sam Zimbabwe, is on the call. And so what we have on the screen is some of the submitted topics we sent to them ahead of time, just to think about, possible things that concern us. But we'll turn over now to folks with questions and let anybody who's the right person to answer. Take it away.
All right, let's start with Pete. You've had your hand up for so long.
Okay, so I'm just curious on the Sound Transit project, since all of my neighbors in the North Delridge neighborhoods are really impacted by this. And during the time from when we first started looking at the alignments, development has continued at a breakneck pace. For example, Transitional Resources is breaking ground on a 44 unit development. As we speak, they're getting ready to tear down houses. And so how does that work with the financing for the Sound Transit Board to look at when it comes to picking the alignment that you're going to take as properties continue to increase in value, because you're going to have to acquire more properties that are of a greater value as all this development continues. And so if things are delayed, where's that money going to come from to buy these properties that you're going to have to do eminent domain on? So I'm just curious, how that's entering into the whole EIS or the DEI, the draft environmental impact statement, and the long term if there are delays.
Pete, this is Joe, and it's not going. You speak to a unique situation or a new situation in some ways for Sound Transit, in that this is the entire West Seattle to Ballard alignment is the first time we're developing a line in a densely populated, already developed neighborhoods. And as part of the DEIS, we're costing out not only the engineering, but the property we need to acquire, and getting a better idea of which particular properties would be needed. And so, yes, part of the DEIS work is calculating the cost and recognizing that even as that work is being done, some of those properties are increasing in cost because of development on them. So cost will be one element. So will numbers of displacements, numbers of properties needing to be purchased, but so will engineering, ridership, walk sheds, and equity, a number of other considerations. So it certainly is one, it's one that maybe that delta is maybe changing more than others during the DEIS, and expedient work on our behalf would serve us well.
So it makes the purple line look even more attractive, doesn't it? I had to put in my plug for the purple line.
Reduces the cost delta, indeed it does.
A lot less people would lose their property in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, on to some chat questions. I've got a couple regarding, on slide 17, which was regarding the budget crunch and possible ways of allaying that. Does modifying the scope mean possibly eliminating the Avalon station, and would something like that be permanent or added later? And I noticed that Council Member McDermott cautioned us to not negotiate against ourselves quite so soon, but I don't know if anybody has something to say about that.
I'd be happy to say more, and then welcome Shefali or Don, anyone else adding as well. I'm serious that negotiating against ourselves will not pay off for West Seattle in the long run. If we rush to the table now and say, look, you have a recession, take our Avalon station. First of all, I don't think that's a position universally held in West Seattle, but I know there are some people who would support it strongly. If we go to the table too fast and tell them what we don't want, what we can give up, then in negotiation, we've already given that up. And then they're looking at what else they can take from us. And is it the next station? How much of an alignment is it? How much more of a delay before we could have service and build the line? Or how much of a local tax base are they looking for us to come up with? While yes, eliminating station or stations along the entire alignment, and in fact, all of the work of Sound Transit far beyond West Seattle to Ballard. Remember, we're building to Federal Way, we're building to Linwood, we're building east. And within Tacoma. So we're not just talking about West Seattle Ballard when we talk about the overall financial reduction. Yes, one of the elements could be eliminating stations for now and adding them when money was available sometime in the future. But I would agree but I would offer that we don't want to rush to the table with what we want to give up, or we will have lost it and we'll be asked for more.
The only thing I would add to that is that I think that, we have to remind ourselves that these are 100-year decisions, right? Like the goal is to build the system out for generations to come. And I think that we have to be really balanced sort of what is the vision that this region is trying to achieve around mobility and a transit system against what we know is going to be a financial crunch. And I think that to Councilmember McDermott's point, why would we negotiate with ourselves? We don't know how quickly or not this economy is going to recover. And as Dawn highlighted, the question is not about whether we can build this plan, right? It is how quickly we can. And I think that, yes, there will be trade-offs, right? If it turns out that, we're in for a prolonged period of recession, then my guess is that will impact the timeline, right? Absent new resources, whether they're state or local or federal. But I think that we are shorting ourselves as a region and as a city. West Seattle is a vibrant urban center. And I think that we should think about, I always think about sort of the folly of Graham Station, right? Or back in the 90s, the board back then, because of financial considerations, decided to eliminate that station. And then we ended up putting it back in, and this is the one in South Seattle. And that community sort of lived the impacts of not having that station as they watched the train go by. So I do agree that we need to be thinking about this in a longer time frame than just the next few years, and thinking about sort of what are the communities we want to create around that, and what is the mobility access we want to make sure that the next generation has as a result.
Okay. Anybody else want to tag on? Okay, I'll continue on with the chat then. Another question, will sub-area equity have to be considered in any cuts? Will other areas have to cut proportionally if West Seattle cuts stations, say, or gets delayed?
Yes, sub-area still applies to reductions in the Sound Transit Financial Plan. The sub-area that the West Seattle extension is part of is North King. So it is all of Seattle to the North County line. And so it is not just West Seattle to Ballard, it's Northgate and such as well. And it is not an even percentage across each sub-area. It relates to the amount of revenue generated in each sub-area. So if the sales tax is stronger in one sub-area, they would have more money, less of a reduction than another sub-area. And I say North King, East King and South King are their own sub-areas, and then Pierce and Snohomish are their own sub-areas as well. So there are 5 sub-areas in the Sun Transit service areas.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question. Will the framework for conversation, slide number 22, be included in the DEIS? I think that's for Don.
Yeah, sure, be happy to speak to that. No, that framework is really for the system program realignment conversation. There is a separate set of project-specific criteria that will inform the West Seattle and Ballard draft EIS. And it's very similar to the criteria that you saw during the screening process that the stakeholder and elected leadership groups weighed in.
Okay. I've also got a question asking how we can expedite light rail to West Seattle. The opposite of... Is there anything other than the economy turning around, I guess?
Well, I think Dow touched on it a little bit, right? I think there's 2 components. There's the actual, how quickly can we get to a final alignment decision, right? So the balance of getting it right versus getting it done quickly. And then the second thing is, if there is some sort of federal stimulus package, we want to make sure that these projects are shovel ready, because those types of significant cash infusions can help speed it along. Now, ultimately, these are very complicated projects, as Don will always remind us. But I think the goal here is to keep it on the timeline that it is, and to be really on the lookout and ready for any type of additional resources to help move things along quicker than possible.
And I've got a question for you, Shefali. Given the mobility issues in West Seattle that were not contemplated in the zoning EIS, should new multifamily development be suspended until capacity is restored?
So it's a good question. You know, I think it's fair to say that no one imagined COVID as any type of scenario that we would live through as a city and as a community. You know, many of these projects are many years in the making, right? So by the time, from the zoning to by the time they're constructed, it's at least several years. And so not sort of knowing kind of how long COVID is going to last, I think what we're trying to do is to be flexible and not sort of make any enduring permanent decisions, but to adapt to existing the conditions on the ground. So part of this is also...
I'm thinking it's the bridge is the mobility issue, not so much COVID.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. But I also think, you know, no one anticipated that the bridge, right? So this is, here's the thing. Ultimately, when we, particularly for multifamily is permitted around transit hubs, or at least that's theoretically the goal. And whatever the mobility solution is sort of for this time when the bridge is not operational, the high span, is to continue to get as much alternative mobility in to West Seattle as possible, right? So I alluded to the Transportation Benefit District having additional service hours for West Seattle. And so that will continue to be SDOT's focus, is how do we move as many people as we can without sort of necessarily relying on kind of single occupancy vehicles to be able to transport people. But yeah, I think it's a fair question. I don't have a good answer for you because it is something that has emerged very quickly. And like I said, some of these development cycles go several years. And I think we'll know more once we have a specific timeline for bridge replacement about what that means for sort of capacity needs for West Seattle and what that sort of more medium-term plan looks like for mobility in West Seattle.
Okay.
We're getting tight on time, so
Okay.
I think there's time for one more question.
Let's give it to Alan. He's had his hand raised.
Thank you very much. I am new to this group. I'm just visiting. And my name is Alan Crawshaw. I live in Sylvan Ridge, which is along Sylvan Way Southwest. I first want to thank the office of Lisa Herbold for putting me in touch with Deb Barker, who has facilitated contact with SDOT. We have, I stress that, yes, closing the West Seattle Bridge is an impact on all of us, but we were left off of the survey study. We are on the High Point neighborhood, and Sylvan Way has a significant record of accidents, 37 by my count in the last 2.5 years, 9 of them occurring in a 300-yard area just up the hill from our entrance. I wanted to thank everybody, and I realize these are long-term projects and readjustments of budgets, but we have an immediate need for traffic calming measures and things that are going to slow the accidents down. We had 2 accidents in the space of 3 days, one wiping out 40 feet of fence line and a 10-inch tree. So I just want to point out that if you live in West Seattle and you're taking the Sylvan Way corridor to the First Avenue South Bridge, please drive 25 miles an hour. We have clocked people going 1.5 times the speed limit. So SDOT, help us out here, please. We are desperate for safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to park your comment there for a moment. We have Heather Marks with SDOT coming up in just a second here to chat a little bit more about transportation mitigation. But before we do that, I want to thank our staff guests and Joe McDermott and Shefali Ranganathan for joining us for the Sound Transit Board conversation. You guys are welcome, obviously, to stay on the call. But I do want to take a chance now to thank you and let you slip out if you have other places to go. And then Heather, this is your chance. I don't know if you've got slides or if we've got other SDOT staffers on the call, but now's the chance to get your slides ready for sharing. Oh, there's Danielle. All right, thank you, Danielle. And Heather, I trust that you'll get to that Sylvan Way
sharing the
comment
slides.
there.
Heather just told me her computer crapped out.
Michael, as we get set up, I'd love to just also thank Leda and Don for joining us and presenting as well.
Yep, and Heather just told me her computer crapped.
Uh-oh. Looks like we've got some technical difficulties happening here.
Michael, did you hear that Heather's
computer just crapped out on her? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? This is Sam.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can other folks hear? And Danielle's got slides up, so
you can hear me?
Yes. Are you able to pinch hit with the slides here?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Both Heather and I seem to be having technical issues. My internet is not working very well, and her computer just crapped out on her.
All right, that's not great. Hey, Danielle, how are you doing with the slides?
Yeah.
Things are going okay over here, I guess. Right?
Can folks hear me? This is Sam.
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm dropping out sometimes. Well, I'll go as much as I can. I will speak as slowly and clearly as I can. And without video, I apologize because my internet is great right now. I'm Sam Zimbabwe. I am the director of SDOT, also a West Seattle resident close to the junction. I'm going to take a few slides and then I will turn it over to Heather. First things first, we wanted to give a little update on the high-rise bridge. then a bit of an update on the Low Bridge, and then Heather's going to spend the bulk of the time, if she gets back, talking about West Seattle, and then Q&A, and I know it's getting late, so we will try to run through as quickly as possible. Daniel, you can go to the next slide. So folks have hopefully been tracking what we did. It's pretty cool. If you go down right now, we built work platforms and installed the first two. The next will go up next Monday, early in the morning, 5:30 to 9. That is the time to go down and check it out. It's like the comet coming by. You know, you got to know when to go see it. We did a lot of work to install monitoring systems over the course of the spring, and that was very effective. When we installed these work platforms, we could see how the bridge responded to additional loading on the bridge. And we've also done a lot more work on non-destructive evaluation, so understanding the structural capacity when the without affecting the concrete, and have found more strength in the bridge than we thought there was. So as we look towards all of the opportunities, repair or replace, we've got a bit better information in which to enter that discussion. And Wednesday at the community task force meeting, we presented the framework for a cost benefit analysis to look at all of those options, repair, replace, and what those different things look like. So we've got about 6 options at a very high level conceptual level that also have a lot of complexity within them. And those range from just the most basic shoring to get, and these are all options to get traffic back, to get the connection back between West and the rest of the region. So there's everything ranged from the just a shoring that gets us minimal capacity in the bridge and with traffic and a very short lifespan that we would then have to come and replace, all the way up to full replacement options, and that includes both a tunnel option, and there's a lot of complexity, again, lots of sub options and different ways to approach that, and then full replacement, including the foundations, to a full replacement of just the superstructure, to repair as well. And those repair options, also a lot of complexity and different ways we could approach it. So I encourage folks who haven't seen that to look through the blog that we put together. A lot of detailed information there. Go on to the next. Oh, and I guess I'd say as we go on to the next, there are, we're trying to keep everything moving as quickly as possible so that we get all of it done as quickly as possible. So that means starting on the, selecting a design consultant for a full replacement at the same time as we're still doing design and installation of work on the repair pathway as well. We've done some work on the Low Bridge, and just really, really briefly, we want to keep that structure working as best as possible. So we're lowering the speed limit and putting some speed limit feedback signs on it. We're diverting the heavy trucks away, and we're also strengthen that. Not exactly the same, although it is a similar structure. You can go forward one more. So just on the Low Bridge, we opened up traffic to everybody from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. It is always open to people driving emergency response, public transit, school bus, and freight vehicles. We are also working to access to employer shuttles, some other things like the library's bookmobile, van pools, and additional workers in the immediate vicinity, T5, Harbor Island there. And as we're the bridge, and the standard is really to make sure that we enable emergency vehicles to get back and forth freely at all time. We don't get emergency vehicles slowed down. And so as we apply that policy, and we continue to bring this to the community task force to get feedback. Go forward one more. I'll really briefly touch on the Seattle Transportation Benefit District. The mayor proposed the measure for a 6-year for a 0.1% sales tax. And then as council voted out of committee, they shortened it to 4-year. There will be a meeting on Monday, I believe, to approve the measure and send it to voters, which would be on the November ballot. And it includes service across the city, low income access to transit, and investments to make transit safe, reliable, and as rapid as possible. So it's a number of things. There's a lot more complexity there, but we've also targeted some of the resources towards mitigating impacts in West Seattle because as we talked about earlier, some of those service needs will require additional resource investments as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather to talk through the Reconnect West Seattle effort, which is a pretty unprecedented level of effort for us as a department in terms of both community engagement and rapid response to the crisis, the infrastructure crisis we face, even in the midst of a health crisis. So take it away, Heather.
Thanks, Sam. My computer died right before the presentation started, so I'm grateful to be back, and thanks, Sam, for starting the presentation out. I want to acknowledge what Sam just said, that this is an unprecedented effort for SDOT in terms of the community-led nature of it and the speed, but I also want to acknowledge that it doesn't feel that fast to all of us who are sort of experiencing the impacts of the bridge. So both of those things are definitely true. So as you guys know, we used to have 21 lanes across the Duwamish, and they were pretty evenly distributed across the river from the south to the north. We have a really different situation now. To the south, the bridge closure has disproportionately impacted the residents and travelers to the south end of West Seattle, as well as South Park and Georgetown, where all the detour routes head. The north, everybody's commute just got a lot worse. And so there's a significant driving capacity disadvantage, but there are some promising water options and some transit options that may come to light in 2021. We're working hard on all of those. Next slide, please, Danielle. So our vision here is to maintain similar levels of travel and mobility to what we had before the high-rise closed, but and simultaneously to reduce the environmental injustices that impact communities in the Duwamish Valley. Through the community-led process, we're identifying all those challenges and prioritizing solutions that are going to help people choose different options other than driving your car alone. We absolutely recognize, and I can't say this strongly enough, that some people are not able to choose something else. But for those who are able, and for those that just a couple of little changes on the street or a couple of little changes in service would really open up those options, we want to explore and implement those. Next slide, please. The Reconnect Seattle concept has 3 parts. First, there are network connectivity plans for freight and for bicycles. There are neighborhood mitigation strategies for Georgetown, South Park, Soto, and sort of the greater south end of West Seattle, including Riverview, Rocks Hill, Highland Park, and South Delridge. And then we have the West Seattle Mobility Plan, which outlines a vision for reimagining how transportation services might exist to meet the needs of West Seattle travelers. Thank you. That was awesome. Our timeline is we launched on July 10th. The surveys will be open until July 31st. The surveys will close then on the 31st. And on August 5th, just a couple of days later, we will be presenting the initial findings to the community task force with a goal of having an actionable plan ready at the beginning of September. We would love to give folks more time to have input, but if we want to build anything this year, September is really the latest we can afford. Next slide, please. So this isn't a live link, but it's a pretty easy one to remember. If you want to go take the survey, please go to seattle.gov/reconnectwestseattle. Several languages are available. If you prefer a paper copy, just let us know. And as ever, send your questions to West Seattle Bridge at seattle.gov or call 206-400-7511. Next slide, please. So we understand folks had some questions, so I wanted to respond to those. Do you want me to just do this in order? Michael, does that sound okay?
Sounds great. We like when you're ready with responses to what we sent you ahead of time.
I try to be ready. So one of the questions you had was you wanted to know about the response rate from the community so far to the Reconnect West Seattle surveys. So the Mobility Action Plan surveys, that's the broader survey, we've had more than 10,000 responses, which is pretty outstanding. Really kind of unbelievable. We're really thrilled with how many people have engaged. And for the neighborhood prioritization ballots, we have more than 1,000 responses. That's a much smaller group of people that we're trying to reach. Do encourage, if you live in any of those neighborhoods that I mentioned, that you particularly go and chime in on those questions. Next week, we have some office hour meetings, and we're going to be sending out some reminders. We just sent out a blog link that shows you when those office hours are with connections to the WebEx. And just a reminder that those surveys do close on July 31st. Next slide, please. So I understand that you have some concerns about detour signage that appears to be incomplete. So we have installed detour signage and marked everything immediately after the closure. And it would really be helpful if we understood with a little bit of specificity where you believe that we have signage missing. And that would be a big help.
Deb or Vicky, I believe it was one of you that's been bringing that up.
As you're heading southbound on I-5 from downtown, heading towards our favorite West Seattle exit, it just says, here's how to get to the West Seattle Bridge. It doesn't say anything about this bridge is closed.
Yeah, I think part of the problem there is that the Spokane Street Viaduct, that structure that allows you to exit to certain places, is still open.
Right.
And so, but I hear you, and we'll work with WashDOT to see what we can get done there. Okay.
Speaking of WashDOT, they did an awesome job today putting out their, I think it is a weekly newsletter, and they did have really good mention of the West Seattle Bridge closure. So it's great that those partners are responsive to some communication. Good luck.
Sure, thank you. Anything else? Is that the one? Okay, we'll talk to him. Okay, you had a question about West Marginal Way, and is there really consideration of turning this into a freight corridor? And is SDOT monitoring speeds traveled along this route since the Vision Zero changes? We are monitoring the speeds, but they weren't available for the presentation tonight. I'm really sorry. They'll be available tomorrow, and so we can send those to you, Michael, if you're willing to send that information out to the group.
That sounds great.
Thanks. We are still evaluating opportunities to improve mobility and safety on West Marginal Way. It's a tough one because there are lots and lots of different constituencies that are interested in West Marginal Way as a route, and not a lot of understanding and compassion among those groups for the issues of the others. So we are in the familiar but unenviable position of trying to balance the needs of the bicycle community, the freight community, as well as the Duwamish Longhouse and the Duwamish tribe. And so we are working on concepts and hoping that we can come up with something that is that works well for everybody. I want to acknowledge that West Marginal Way has 200% above baseline traffic. It is huge. And so we have to find a way to make it safe for everybody and accessible for everybody, acknowledging how important the route is. Okay, great. I bet you there are questions.
All right, thank you, Heather. While Kate reviews our chat for questions, Heather, will you take Alan, before you began,
Before
pointed
my
out that,
computer crapped out.
yes, the
Sorry.
Sylvan Way neighborhood, there's been a number of accidents
Yes.
in that area in just the last week or two.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
they're a neighborhood that wasn't highlighted. Is that something that SDOT can take a look at?
Absolutely. And in fact, we've had arborists out there to trim trees, and we have ordered radar feedback speed signs. They're going to be it's an 8-week delay to get those. So I think it's going to be about 5 weeks, and we will get those out there and put them in immediately. There are difficulties in traffic calming on a street that is both an arterial and such a steep hill. And so we're going to start there, and we have the traffic engineers working on other options to see if there's anything we can do to slow folks down. I think one of the things that we're seeing in every neighborhood is that people are unfamiliar and frustrated, right? So folks have to take different goat paths than they usually are used to get to where they're going, and they're probably late. And so they're not familiar with the surroundings, and they're super frustrated. And so it's a recipe for really unfortunate outcomes. And so I hope we, I live here in Fauntleroy. I hope we can all be really conscious and slow as we're driving through unfamiliar neighborhoods. I hope that's, sorry, Alan, I wish it could be more, but we really are working on it.
Well, thank you, if I may. The one of the key parts of that, as you pointed out, is unfamiliar neighborhood, frustration, downhill with a curve.
Yep.
And that's where a lot of our accidents happen, is right on that curve. And we have one little curve sign up by the cemetery. If we've got 3 lampposts there, just an arrow sign saying curve, point this way.
Yeah, Alan, so like I said, we have some traffic engineers working on that. I know somebody has gone out to look at it and see what we can do to make that a little bit better. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And believe me, I'm familiar with the hill, and so I know it can be treacherous under the best of circumstances.
We're running a little behind. So Kate, do we have a good 1 or 2 questions?
Ooh, we've got more than that, but okay, I'll just start at the top. Do the repair options include bringing up the High Ridge Bridge to current earthquake standards?
No.
Well, that was easy.
not the repair options. The rehabilitation and replacement options do address more seismic safety.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is the West Seattle money in the benefit district to be used for metro service only, or is it possibly going to be used for capital type projects?
Hey, that's a really good question. I don't think it can be used for capital, and it's just $5 million for like a 2-year period. If Sam's still here, maybe he knows better than I do. Just to be perfectly candid, I have not been following the STBD conversation probably as much as I should, but I'm doing my best over here.
I am still here, if you can hear me, and there's a it's like Heather said, it's really targeted towards service. There is capital money in the overall SCBD. There's a little bit of flexibility we talked about. Flexibility. I think there's some thought about, and they'll be voting on final final, it sounds like they'll be voting on final measure on Monday.
Yep.
More technical problems. Yeah.
Am I frozen?
No, you are not.
Oh, okay. Phew.
All right. Should we add one more question because those were pretty short, or should we keep going,
Yes,
Michael?
well, we can do one more.
All right. Are SDOT and Sound Transit discussing a combined immersed tube tunnel? None of the current 6 options address transit.
Well, all of the 6 options address transit because buses are going to be able to travel on all of the options. There is an attribute in our cost benefit analysis that is called forward compatibility. And so for all of those options, the ability to build them to accept link light rail should we all decide to move in that direction on the either rehabilitated or replaced bridge, the bridge replacement, whatever we replace the bridge with. So forward compatibility is one of those things that we'll judge each of the candidates by. And so one of the things that we especially ask from the community task force is some feedback about, first of all, the attributes that are included in the cost benefit analysis and how important each of those attributes is relative to each other. That probably wasn't that clear. Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you as always, Heather. Before you go, if you can send an email to us tonight or tomorrow, our Vice Chair, Marty Westerman, unless he's on the call now, is not with us this evening. But we would like to figure out where he can meet up with you in West Seattle. We want to present you with a West Seattle Transportation Coalition t-shirt. So, you know, let us know where's a good opportunity to do that. We might require you to take a photo holding it up.
Okay.
But you've been here, you know, month after month, doing your best to answer all our questions. So
aren't you sweet?
We want to make sure we thank you for that.
Probably we'd have to give one to all of SDOT because you can't give gifts to just one.
if it's worth less than $25, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think we slip in under the gift.
Right under that's yeah. But I can share it with my colleagues. That'll, I'm sure, be very sanitary. All right, my friends. Thank you so very much. Happy to come back. It's just sort of a standing thing on my calendar, so I assume I'll be here.
And thanks to you as well, Danielle, and Sam, if you're still with us, thank you very much for persevering through what was happening there. All right, so folks who are on the call, we do still have some more business to take care of, so I hope you will hang out with us for a few more minutes. We're running about 10 minutes behind, but hopefully we can speed through this. So it is that time of year for us to have board nominations and elections. As it's 2020 and an even year, all of our even numbered positions are available, which is a good chunk of the board right now. So positions 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 are currently Victoria, Deb, myself, Kate, and Marty Westerman, who's not on our vice chair, who's not on the call tonight. So board member Larry Weimer is on deck to move this slate for nomination. So Larry, I'll turn to you. I saw Larry. Are you here? Are you muted, Larry? Uh-oh, maybe we lost Larry. How about John? Are you with us? Oh, there he is. All right.
Yes, slate for West Seattle Transportation.
All right, John, are you with us to second?
I second.
All right. So we've moved the slate of current board members up for re-election. Do we have additional nominations for other folks? We currently have vacant positions 1, 5, and 7, which would be 1-year terms until next year.
Can we nominate Heather Marks?
I don't believe staff can serve in such positions, but we wish we could bring that on board.
Yeah.
All right, not hearing any other further nominations, or I suppose there could be challenges to the existing slate as well.
Oh, Michael?
Yes.
Can people put their name forward if somebody's interested in the position?
Yes, we are open to, as I said, additional nominations. Again, we have 3 vacant positions right now that are 1-year terms, or someone could elect to challenge one of the folks up for re-election.
Or somebody could offer for 1, 5, or 7?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Again, I'm not hearing nominations, but I'll wait again. And then one last time, are there any further nominations before we close? All right, not hearing any, and presumably I guess I should check to see if somebody put something in the chat. Not seeing anything in the chat. I would, and this is something that I guess that everybody theoretically on the call is allowed to vote. So I guess I'll say folks could post votes in the chat. I guess we haven't done this in a virtual environment. So I'll say, we'll assume all those in favor, I said, board members can share, and anyone else, all those in favor of re-electing the current board members in 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, say aye.
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 Aye. Those who are opposed, if you could raise your hand in the participant window or add a no in the chat window so that we can record that number. And then similarly, any abstentions. If somebody needs to raise their hand in the participant window or add something in the chat to record that abstention. Not seeing anything. Whoops. That's the window does funny things back here. Sorry about that. All right. Congratulations to all of us re-elected board members. So with just a few minutes, we do have old business. We always mention this is an all-volunteer board. West Seattle Transportation Coalition is a recognized corporation and community organization here in Washington State, but we are not an IRS 401c3. But folks who want to support the work that we're doing, monthly costs for our Zoom accounts, various other things we do, website, etc. We're always welcome your support. We called out earlier, we do have a YouTube channel now where you can see recordings of our previous virtual board meetings, as well as a couple of us early on testifying at the City Council. And presumably moving forward, we'll look at possibly other activities getting posted there. Board members, I don't believe we have any other additional old business to bring up, but I'll pause in case I'm missing something. Okay, moving on to new business then. Typically, we take off August like a number of neighborhood groups do. But the board has decided this year that because we're in this, strange new world where we have lots of virtual meetings, where we have the ability to record meetings, and where a lot of folks are not planning to travel as they normally would in August, or even I guess some of us, if you are traveling in August, there is the ability to attend virtually. So we've decided to move ahead with our with holding an August membership meeting for the first time in a few years. And we are very excited that joining us will be Representative Pramila Jayapal, who's our Congresswoman here for West Seattle and District 1. Sorry, City Council District 1. Obviously, her congressional district is a little wider than that. And so we will be talking with her about, you know, how is she assessing the environment there in the other Washington and opportunities to try and tap some federal grants and dollars or possibilities she sees for infrastructure bills or things being filed in the next year or two that could help us. And we'll be looking to bring in some other groups to really start to get into the meat of how might we fund a repair or rebuild option for the West Seattle Bridge. And then I also want to bring up that the West Seattle Transportation Coalition is looking at drafting a letter to SDOT about West Marginal Way. As you saw in one of the questions that we brought up there with Heather Marks, we've got some concerns about how SDOT is monitoring speeds there since the Vision Zero implementations along the road. To be clear, we're not objecting to the goals of Vision Zero for the city, which SDOT was just recognized nationally for some of the work it's done. But specific to this corridor on West Marginal Way, we're very concerned that all we've done so far is put up some signs. And as folks who have been venturing out may have noticed, some of our fellow West Seattleites are not necessarily being so good about either being aware of the new speed limit or observing it. And so we'd like to ask, it sounds like SDOT has been looking at speed, so we look forward to getting that from SDOT this week. But really, like, are there additional steps we need to take, and what might that look like? I know in some other places we've seen speed highlight signs that flash up when folks are driving above the speed limit. Maybe there needs to be a broader education effort to remind people that that is no longer the speeds that used to be there. But unlike many other areas of the city where where the Vision Zero drop simply went from 30 miles per hour down to 25, or I think in a few areas, residential areas, they've gone from 25 to 20. This is a significant drop. That's more than 5 miles per hour. So we're looking to see what SDOT's response is to help continue to address this specific corridor. That's all I have for new business. So if others have either additional new business to propose or additional questions, we'll look to the chat or the participant window. All right, not seeing anything in the chat window. And I am not seeing anybody with hands raised. Then unless you hear anything else, it looks like we squeaked in about 2 or 3 minutes early there. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
All right. Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, we will see everyone in August with Congresswoman Jayapal.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good work.